This story took place in a small town where I lived in 1967. I was 21 at the time, and I was dating a girl named Amelia who lived somewhat far away. At that time and in that region, distances were shortened by shortcuts within the farms. So whenever I went to hang out with Amelia, I went through these shortcuts. The farm where I lived had several employees who did different jobs, like taking care of the horses, cattle and crops. In our house lived me, my mother, my father and my grandfather. One day, some employees started to report to my father that there was something strange in the cornfield, because mainly in the afternoon and at night, they heard something going through the cornfield and saw some corn stalks moving, as if something was moving through the plantation. They told my dad they went there to see what it was, but they found nothing but a few corn stalks crushed by something that pushed them. My dad told everyone to watch and see if it was an animal or what it could be. One day, after the services were over, my father came home, showered, had dinner and was talking to my mother and grandfather. Later, around midnight, when we had all gone to sleep, I woke up and heard a noise coming from outside the house, like someone picking at a bush. I got up, grabbed an oil lantern and went out to see what it was. When I left, I looked at the cornfield, which started about 15 meters from my house, on the left side. At that moment I saw the corn stalks moving, just as the servants had told my father, and I heard a noise as if there was something walking around in there. I stood there thinking about what to do. It could be some wild animal. Suddenly, something came out of the cornfield. What I saw was a giant black dog, with tall bristly fur. The back of the body had little hair and the front was very hairy. It was about the size of an ox, huge. The front legs were smaller and disproportionate to the body and the other two hind legs. It had red glowing eyes. Startled, I ran into the house and yelled for my parents to wake up. My parents and my grandfather woke up and came to see what was going on. When I told them what had happened, they called me an irresponsible madman. They said I could have died. The next day, my father said that there were crushed corn stalks there, as if something had stepped on and pushed the plants. Everyone was scared because it was something mysterious. My grandfather was already saying that this could be a werewolf, but my father wasn't a very superstitious man. After a few days, nothing unusual happened, until a certain night. One night, as they usually did, my father and my mother sat at the front of the house to talk and get some air, and they stayed there for a while. It was already around 10 p.m. Suddenly they heard that noise again, of something walking through the cornfield and pushing at the corn stalks. So my parents were watching to see if they saw anything. In a moment, the noise was getting closer to our house, as if whatever was moving through the cornfield was heading towards them. My parents then got scared, and that's when they saw among the last stalks of corn, near the house, two red eyes. It was tall, but they couldn't see what it was. So my parents ran into the house and locked themselves. A few moments later they heard heavy footsteps and something forcing the door to try to enter. It was banging on the door of our house, trying to break down the door. My mother started to pray, and moments later my grandfather appeared with an old rifle he had. As soon as he arrived, my grandfather took aim at the door and fired. Then the pounding stopped and we heard the heavy footsteps receding and the noise in the cornfield. Everyone slept scared and worried that night. The next day my father called the servants, and they scanned the cornfield to see if they could find anything. They only found crushed corn stalks and deep canine footprints in a few places. My mother, who was very religious, called a priest to bless the place and everyone prayed all over the place. After a few days, some employees heard the noises in the cornfield again but saw nothing. Later on, other people from the neighborhood, and even from the church, also saw the same creature. And it didn't take long for animal attacks to begin. Amidst a wave of attacks, the population was scared, and everyone avoided going out alone at night, except me. Personally, I thought it could be some animal from that area, and not something supernatural. I still went to Amelia's house alone and on foot. Young people have a way of thinking they're immortal, and I was no different. The only thing that had changed was that I now carried a dagger and pistol with me. On a Saturday, I went to Amelia's house, and after dating most of the afternoon and a little at night I decided to leave. It was almost midnight when I said goodbye to Amelia and left. I took the path inside the farms, which was shorter. I had already been warned by my father-in-law to be careful with that path, because he was afraid of that creature that was roaming the land. But I still went that way. The path was quiet, and unlit except by the moonlight. On the way I heard some strange noises. I suddenly heard a kind of grunt in front of me, but I didn't care and kept walking. Walking a little farther, a little ahead, I saw that same being I have seen before, scratching at a tree as if sharpening its claws. At the time I started to break out in a cold sweat when I saw that huge, standing creature. At that moment I tried to sneak out, but the creature noticed and looked at me, advancing on me. I only had time to pull the dagger, and when the creature approached, I stabbed the creature several times. The creature screamed in pain but did not give up, continuing the attack. We kept fighting, and I kept stabbing it, until the creature gave up and walked away. I was badly hurt, but I continued on my way, only this time I was staggering and in awe of what had happened. I realized I had lost my pistol. Since I didn't know where it was, I kept going. Up ahead, to my surprise, the creature was waiting for me in the trail. That thing attacked me again. Then the fight started again, and it was bloody. I delivered several blows to fend off the monster, and again the beast fled into the tall grass in the dark of night. By then it was almost 2 a.m., and the road became long and painful due to my injuries. The walking lasted most of the night. When I got home the sun was already out, and I was all torn up and hurt. My grandfather, who was a very brave man, when he saw what happened he took his gun and went after a person he suspected was the werewolf, because there were already rumors about that person. Arriving there, my grandfather saw this man sitting in a rocking chair in front of the house, very injured, but he seemed to be doing well even with his injuries. My grandfather, coming closer, pointed the gun at his head and said, "Don't ever come near anyone in my family again, or I'll kill you." Then the man looked at my grandfather and with a thick, sarcastic voice said, "Oh dear, do you have any silver bullets in there?" And he smiled. My grandfather didn't back down and said, "You've been warned." A few weeks later, that man they suspected was the werewolf moved out of town. Coincidence or not, the attacks stopped. I had to go to the hospital, and I remember that at the time I had to get stitches. Thus ends the most extraordinary story of my family.